Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com and I'm here today with another 1/35th scale workable track link tutorial and review video, this time for the 1/35th scale workable M1 Abrams main battle tank tracks from Dragon Models. Obviously, what you see on the table is not the set of tracks. This is actually the model that the tracks are going to be fitted to, which in this case is a 1990s vintage Dragon M1A2 Abrams Main battle tank. This model here is going to be the subject matter of its very own model showcase video, which will be posted shortly before this video here makes its debut. Also, I'll have the link to the model showcase video found in the video description. If anyone is a fan of vintage tank reviews and builds, I definitely recommend checking that video out. Back to the subject matter at hand, the reason why I have to make this video goes back to the model that we have here on the table. This being a 1/35th scale Dragon kit of the 1990s era, it gives you individual link and length tracks, and as anyone who's a fan of this channel will tell you, that I have an utmost disdain and loathing for those tracks, and it will indeed be a cold day in hell when you see me utilize those tracks on a 1/35th scale model. So obviously a replacement solution is going to be required, which ties us back to the subject matter that we have here, which is for the T-158 Bigfoot workable pattern tracks from Dragon Model. Let me go ahead, get this guy off the table here so we can start the review on the components here in this box. As I mentioned before, this set here is from the company Dragon Models. Dragon Models is a relatively new addition to the armor modeling racket. They've been around now for about, I want to say 5, maybe 8 years or so. However, even though they haven't been around for very long, they have definitely carved out a niche for being one of the best plastic model kit companies in 1/35th scale. Their kits are extremely well detailed, and in addition to being well detailed, they also went ahead and peeled away from doing just full kits to doing sets that are sold as aftermarket. They released a bunch of workable track sets. In fact, I actually did a workable track set review for their 1/35th scale Panzer III and Panzer IV pattern of track, which is definitely something I also recommend checking out, specifically if you're looking for an aftermarket track solution for one of those pattern of vehicles. This one here, obviously, is for the M1A1 or M1A2 Abrams. These tracks here have been on the market now for, I want to say, about 6 or 7 or so years. So these are actually some of the older releases done by Dragon, which I'll circle back to with the logo. As for the components, these are actually really easily come by on places like eBay as well as AliExpress. I purchased these for a little under $20 US, and then with shipping factored in, it basically equaled out to about 25 or so. What's interesting to point out is that when it comes for workable track link solutions for Abrams vehicles in 1/35th scale, you do have a few other options available. One of the oldest is from AFV Club. That says actually at the same age of the kit that I'm actually going to be utilizing these tracks on. Arguably I should use those tracks for this build, but that'll be a topic for another day. There are also several other workable track link sets from Trumpeter in both the early Chevron pattern as well as the Bigfoot pattern, and there are also, I believe, metal track links from Fruli as well as our model. So needless to say, there are quite a lot of options out there on the market. Some are more pricier than others. Dragon here is actually more on the affordable end, as with AFV Club links, so we're going to see how these pan out on this build. The tracks that you see here are all encompassing injection molded polystyrene components, which is why they are on the more affordable end as opposed to the metal track links, which tend to be about double the cost. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at the set itself. So starting with the box art, here we have the typical box art that Dragon likes to utilize for their aftermarket track sets, where we have a nice line drawing of the vehicle in question, but the tracks are in full color. This is something that AFV Club has also done from time to time, and it's for a reason that should be fairly obvious. The box art is very minimalistic. Here you can just see the basic text of what you're getting. This, by the way, is item number RM-5009 for those who are interested. Here goes the do not eat warnings on the bottom over here, and here you can see the Dragon Models logo. This, by the way, is actually their first logo, which has this rather childish or juvenile type appearance to it. Since then, they revamped their logo to make the appearance a bit more edgier, but either way, it's still the same exact excellent tooling. On the side over here, you get to see again just more minimalistic box art, some corporate info, as well as the barcode. Same is true for the opposite side. And just like what we see on many other 1/35 scale workable track links, we have here a set of instructions right here on the back. So as you can see, this is going to be a multi-part assembly where we have track pads, we have a jig, we have the pins that are all connected with the middle tooth section, and then the teeth are separate sections that got to get glued on top. Seems pretty straightforward enough. Opening up the box, we'll reveal the contents. Okay, so first off, everything is molded in this Panzer Gray type color. Everything is also individually sealed. So let's go ahead and open these up. Oh, they use the resealable bags, which is a nice touch. I actually recycle these on use on part orders. Okay, so here goes the first runner over here. I like the way they have the little X cut out, just as similar to what TACCOM does. And as you can see, the pieces are very nicely molded. Hopefully that comes out on camera and focuses in just right. But we actually have two options of guide horns here. The first option has the guide horns hollow, and the other one here has them solid. It's a nice, interesting touch. And you do have the option for either on this build. As for which one works for you, well, basically you have to go ahead and do a little research on the vehicle at hand before you go ahead and commit. But that's actually a very nice feature. The pieces are excellently rendered out. There's no flash or anything along those lines. And the geometry on these pieces are excellent. These sets here are done with all modern injection molded technology as well as CAD, and Rye Fuel kits always have a really good reputation of being excellently engineered, and these pieces here are starting to reflect that. Here goes the jig. Looks like we got two of them side by side. There you go. So you get to do two spans simultaneously. This will definitely speed up construction. The jigs do not connect in any which way, and the reason why this is relevant to point out, because on their Panzer III and Panzer IV pattern of tracks, they have this little cool feature where they puzzle fit together, so the more sets you get, the longer of the jig you can actually assemble. This one here, that doesn't seem to be the case. Now, I'm not sure if this was actually revamped, because I actually ran into that on the Panzer III tracks, where I did a set a number of years ago, and that one did not have the puzzle setup, and then the one that I did recently, they revamped the molds to do that. I'm not sure if this one is relevant for that, but it is something to point out. The next thing to mention is the larger set of runners that we have here, which are the track pads themselves. You get quite a lot of sprues. It's going to be interesting to see how many are going to be spare after I'm done assembling the tracks, but here you get to see the tracks themselves. So the runner is split in half. Here we have the inner extremities right here. And here we have the outer extremities. This being the Bigfoot pattern track, these would be rubber on the real vehicle. And if the camera can zoom in accordingly, you get to see the detailing found on the surface, as well as also the geometry found on the rubber pads. And again, everything is excellent. Very good quality. As a side note, I believe actually Rye Fuel does make straight up M1 Abrams full kits, which if they do, you're probably going to get these tracks stock out of the box. On the flip side, you get to see the inner confines. Everything is so nicely engineered with their tolerances and also with the way the pegs are integrally molded on. And it's going to be fun going ahead and snipping away all these little components. The final bag here consists of the pin and the rods themselves. This is similar to what I've seen on the internet from other workable track links from Bronco, specifically their Pershing pattern tracks, which had a similar type assembly method. I've never done one of those, so I can't say heads or tails on it. But here you get to see the pieces. Again, very, very, very excellently molded. And it's going to be really interesting to see how well these parts clean up and how they assemble and hinge once fitted together. I like the way they molded it, where you don't have any sort of appendages making contact with the bars themselves, which I believe was actually the problem with the Bronco sets because of the way these are molded. They're very frail, and having to remove material on these sections over here is less than ideal, specifically since this is the area that needs to pivot, so it's actually quite relevant to have these sections clean. On the Rye Fuel ones here, that isn't the case. Looks like they just molded the sets together onto the end connector for the track. This zoom here is killing me, but there you go. Yeah, it's molded to the end connectors of the track, which is easier to snip away. It's also stronger of a point, and it should make for an easier assembly process. But again, that all remains to be seen. So that's it for all of the parts that are supplied with the set. Let's go ahead and jump to the tools that are going to be required in order to get these things fully assembled. And these here are the tools in question. Some of these tools are a must-have, and you'll see me actually using them in this video. However, some of the other tools are optional. However, they may come in handy on your build, and it's just good to have in your modeling toolbox. So starting from left to right, takes to first a pair of clean-cut snips, a small miniature pair of needle-nose pliers, a X-Acto and or a miniature snap blade cutter like this one over here, a bottle of thick super glue, slow cure specifically, an optional piece of equipment would be a bottle here of super solvent. This stuff is great at dissolving super glue without harming polystyrene. ABS plastic, however, less so. It's always good to have a bottle of this stuff on hand, and it's come in handy on a number of my builds in the past. Another optional piece of equipment is a set of needle files. These are basically standard, or should be standard, in your modeling toolbox. Really easily come by, and for this particular project here, the one that's probably come in the most useful is the flat version. Another piece of equipment that is definitely going to be used on this build, or I should say assembling this project, are a length or two of sandpaper. Here I have 400 and 220 grit. The 220 is a bit on the coarser end. The 400 is nice and fine, and this should actually yield for some excellent results with the application that they are going to be used for. By the way, pretty much all the tools that I just referenced, or I should say a good majority of them, can be found in your standard hardware store or a place like Harbor Freight. Matter of fact, the needle files came from Harbor Freight. The sandpaper came from my local Ace Hardware. However, the other tools that you see here are also very commonly found in hardware stores. Again, this guy here came from Ace. And the other bits of equipment can be found on Amazon.com. This would include the needle file, or I should say the needle nose plier, the clean cut snips, definitely the super solvent, that's where I always buy it from, and also my super glue comes from Amazon as well. For the units that are found on Amazon, you'll be able to find the links in the description below. And after a little bit of time, we have one of the track bands fully assembled. The tracks do go together, but they are a bit more tedious compared to some of the other workable tracks that I have done in the past. And now that I've assembled the first one, I could definitely go ahead and assemble the second one in a faster manner, as this is generally the case when you're working on workable tracks. First track band, you get your groove going, then the second track band just seems to go together a lot faster, and again, mostly effortlessly. As for the number of supplied links, the kit does, I should say the set does supply you with an ample amount. Here we have the last runner that I was working on to assemble the track band over here, and we have a nice little cluster right over here in the center. I did burn through two of these other sprues completely, and this here is just what's remaining left. So it's about 2 1/4, or I should say 2 3/4 of the sprues in order to assemble one complete track band. And I have 3 more runners left intact. So again, the set does give you more than enough components. The build went together fairly smooth. However, I did lose a couple links by having a mistake that was made, and I will be mentioning that, or what to watch out for during the actual construction, the next scene. And the sets go together more or less as they should. I will say that they are more time consuming compared to some other options on the market, namely the older sets from AFV Club, but I will go into a little bit more about that at the end of the video. I went ahead and test fit the band onto the vehicle in question, and in total there are 77 links on the band over here, and there will be 78 in total because of the way the joining link goes together. This is something I am going to be touching upon after things are painted, but unlike the other tracks that are out there where it's done with the end connectors, where you put the two sections together, then you just put the end connector and it joins everything in place. Because of this one, with the way everything clamps together, you will have an extra track link to consider, and In all, there were going to be 78 links, and oddly enough, that's exactly how many links are recommended on the box, which is interesting because sometimes it's a little more or a little less as the recommended track number. That's one thing I always learned about these tracks. It's always best to test fit them kind of like a pair of shoes. But this one here on the old school Dragon Abrams, for instance, yeah, the box, it tells you exactly how many links you need, which is quite refreshing, to be honest. They are fairly flexible, and this will will depend on how the pieces are glued together, and I will really be harping upon this in the next scene when I actually get the things assembled. But from here, I'm going to go ahead and just roll these guys up, and then we could go ahead and start with the actual assembly. So the first thing that you are going to have to do, and this is the most time-consuming aspect, is to remove the components off of the sprue and deburr them. And this is true for basically every single workable track link set that I've worked with in the past. The most amount of work is with the actual deburring. Very few sets out there need any deburring, and this here is definitely the former. So this one here will be deburred. And also one other thing I want to mention is for this one I'm going with the hollow track horns, for the simple reason that all the other Abrams builds I've done have the solid ones, and since they give it to you in the hollow format, I might as well go ahead and roll with those ones for this particular build. But this is, again, your choice. Basically, I burned through 2 of these sprues completely, and here's the other one that I just started. And also, I did lose 1 or 2 of these components just because of how frail they are during deburring. Again, I was kind of getting the groove in. I will show how to do that with the best chances of survival. So the first thing you're going to do for the assembly, besides deburr everything, is you're going to need to get the pieces, or I should say the horns, installed onto the pins themselves. This is in contrast to the instructions where they want you to assemble the track and then glue the track teeth in place. And this is something that you don't want to do. One, it streamlines production by having the pieces glued on at this point. And also, it becomes easier to glue in place because when you're trying to manhandle these things with a drop of glue on them and drop them into the appropriate location, you could accidentally pivot one and make contact with something that you don't want to make contact with something with glue, which will in turn gum up the track, and that's something that you want to avoid. By gluing these pieces beforehand, this one makes it easier to just pick them up and drop them into place. And the second thing is, again, it prevents any sort of collateral damage with glue being accidentally put in places where you don't want them to be placed. So that's the first thing you're going to do. I got this set over here, and I'm just going to go ahead and dump out a bunch on the table. I already got 2 of these guys ready to go. So yeah, I'll just go ahead and dump some of these guys out on the table here, and then I'm going to start going ahead and continue with the removal. To do this, you just simply use the clean cut snips here, and you just remove the pieces accordingly. With the way the teeth are shaped, we have a piece of sprue right over here that conjoins the bottom section of the tooth to the runner, and you just want to carefully just snip this little section off like so. You want to be careful because there are the 2 little pegs found molded into this section over here, and that is so that the piece plugs into the pin. So obviously you want to protect those as much as possible. You could either snip close, or you could snip a little chunk off like I did over here off of the sprue. Either way will work just fine. I'll go ahead and just do one more. Okay, so now that the pieces are removed, you need to go ahead and deburr them. And this is where I like to use the clean, or I should say the X-Acto. I'm just going to go in here and just carve off the section of sprue. And as you see, the piece just flung right off once the blade was applied to the appropriate location. Do the same thing to the one on the opposite side, like so. When the units are still together like this, it's actually easier to handle the sections because you have more surface area. Once the pieces have been deburred, I'm going to go ahead and snip off the piece with a clean cut snip right here. Just like so. Hopefully this comes out on camera. Set that guy aside and do the same thing to this guy right here. Well, it just gave off. It just popped off on its own. So there is a small little burr found on the top portion of the tooth where the piece of runner once was. You can deburr them right now with the use of a needle file. However, I actually found it easier to install them onto the track, and then once the track is fully assembled, you can just run some sandpaper up and down the surfaces, and this will polish down the top portions of the teeth, and I will show that after everything is assembled. So that's the first thing you're going to do. Once these pieces here are fully deburred, I'm going to go ahead, and it helps to have a little plier like this one over here. And you just want to add a little drop of glue to the two locations. It would really help if I had a brand new bottle, but for this one here, I think it should work. And then you're just going to add the tooth, I'll use this guy over here, to the appropriate locations. This is where, by the way, I accidentally broke one of the teeth because I was inserting into its location, and it wasn't fitting in right because I was actually installing it as per the kit, and I actually crushed and deformed the piece. Also, during deburring, I also deformed the piece by holding it in the plier here with the needle file. These pieces are fairly frail, specifically the hollowed out ones. The thicker one, I should say the solid ones are a bit more robust in that respect, but that's why I recommend gluing them to the thing first, assembling it, then just wiping it down with some sandpaper. It will make the job go by much easier. So just rinse, wash, and repeat until you have all of the pins with their teeth in place. To remove the track pads off of the sprue, clean cut snips is more than suffice for the task at hand, and these pieces are nice and robust, so you don't have to worry about breaking them during the extraction. I like to snip 16 of these units off at a given time, because with that I can actually flesh out both of these jigs over here in one inning, which does actually cut down on time quite a bit. Although the time you save with that, you lose with trying to clean individually all these pieces off and deburr them properly. So it is a one-to-one exchange, but the point still stands. After all the parts are removed off of the sprue, it's then time to start deburring. To deburr them, I use the clean cut snips just to remove the center portion, like you see right here, and then whatever's left, I could just simply use my X-Acto or my hobby knife over here just to remove any other material further. You can also use a file or a needle file for the same procedure. Both procedures will get to the exact same results. You do this to all of these whole pieces, and then finally you're ready for assembly. On the inner portions here of the pads, you want to be a little bit careful when it comes time for cleaning and deburring because of the little porthole that we have here. This makes the parts a little bit more fragile compared to the ones on the opposite side, but if you can see, I'm still able to navigate accordingly. So just do this a bunch of times, and then finally you're ready for assembly. After everything is deburred, it's now time for assembly. So the first thing you're going to do is start with the bottom pads, like this guy over here. And the way the bottom pads get lined up is into these little grooves, and you do have to be careful of the orientation. So if you look at the bottom pad, you know what, let me grab the one on the runner, it's probably easier to get into focus. So here you can see there are these two divots, and then there is a fastener that's found integrally molded into the bottom section. The fastener needs to be on the outer extremity of the track, and this is important because you can easily misalign this when you're lining them up in the jig, and when it comes time for final assembly, the parts aren't going to fit properly. So that little section right over there, get this guy in focus, it's really hard because of how small everything is. See that little knob right there? Well, that gets put on the top end just like so. And then the other one is going to be a mirror image. So the knob is going to be opposing it. And that's basically what you want to do. You want to repeat this until you have all of the jig lined up with the correct components. Once you go ahead and line everything up, the next thing to drop on are the pins. So here we have one of these units over here that are ready to go, and after the piece is snipped off with a needle file, I just like to run over the section over here of the end connector that was connected to the sprue, just so that you could deburr it and make sure that there's no other hang-ups on it, which can potentially interfere with the sprocket timing. And then from here, you're just going to carefully just line these up. And by the way, there's another reason why I like recommending installing the tooth before you assemble into the track, and that is with proper orientation. So if I grab one of these naked pieces over here, or I should say one of these original parts, you can see that you can easily mount it in upside down. And if that happens, you're screwed, because you're not going to be able to install the tooth properly, and the piece is going to stick out like an eyesore. And once it's installed in place, you can't exactly remove it, so you have to destroy the link to do it. And this actually happened to me when I was first assembling one of these tracks. I was assembling it as per the instructions, and I did that, and I'm like, uh-oh, time to bust out the clippers, which is why you can see some busted track links here on the table. That was from that experience. So you want to avoid that from happening, and one of the easiest way to do that is to simply pre-glue the tooth onto their sections, because it makes it impossible to install it in reverse. So that's definitely something you want to be aware of. Here's what the set looks like with all of the teeth added in place. And this one here, I'm going to start with the same exact procedure. One thing I do want to mention is that on the sections themselves, they're really easily removed off of the sprue with a little snip of the clean cut snips here. It makes really short work of it. And as I mentioned before, once they are removed, I personally just like to take a needle file and I just roll the section briefly on the two sections where they were originally connected, just to make sure that, again, they are thoroughly deburred. At that point there, just drop it directly into place. And at this point here, the biggest thing you have to watch out for is just bumping into things with your finger. And then when that happens, they just scatter all over the place. And then you're like, oh, great. I got to go ahead and get them all lined up. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and continue with adding the pins and the teeth. But again, just to show exactly how easy that gets dropped in place. And just rinse, wash, and repeat. Okay, so from here, once this is done, we can actually start with the mounting of the top pads. To put the top pads in place, which, by the way, the top pad, in case I mentioned before, is one with a little peephole right over there, you need to add a finite amount of glue, and I cannot stress this enough, a finite amount of glue to the one little peg. If you try to assemble this without any glue in place, the thing is just going to fall apart on you like peanut brittle, and that's not going to do you any favors. The glue is going to be absolutely required. Now, the one thing that I've seen about this track design, and it's the biggest challenge, is to get the pieces glued on and not get any glue into the parts where you don't want it. And again, with how small our working spaces is over here, we have these two channels which the pin has to pivot in, and it's not hard for the glue to seep into that section. And if that happens, it's going to get onto the pin, and it's either going to lock the piece solid, which is definitely not something that you want specifically on a workable track link, or it's going to inhibit it and just make it a little bit sluggish and a little bit more difficult to install and flex around sprockets and wheels. Again, less than ideal. This track manufacturing method I've seen used on a number of modern generation tracks from several manufacturers. Tacom is the one that definitely comes to mind. They utilize the same procedure on their M60 and M1A2 pattern tracks, as well as their 1/16 scale builds like the Andy's Hobbies M4A3 E8 comes to mind, which, by the way, yes, I actually have that kit. Yes, I'll be doing a video and a tutorial video on those tracks. And yes, it's something that's going to come, but that's going to be a topic for a future video down the road. Although for the 1/16 scale, it's much easier compared to the smaller working confines we have here. So here we have my tuba glue, and by the way, it would be really beneficial if I had a fresh tip on this one. This tip here has definitely seen better days, but I should have enough muscle control to go ahead and apply the glue appropriately. So you want to apply literally a small little drop on just the one pin. Just like that. Okay, there you go. Did you see that come out? Just that small, itsy bitsy little drop of glue. That's all and where you need the glue. And then you have to carefully just line it up, drop it in place, and then push down. And then it'll seat appropriately. And that's it. Just rinse, wash, and repeat. And when you have the segment done, it's going to look something like this. Here's the segment with both of the pads installed, and this guy here is just setting aside and drying. And here you can see the other one going through its assembly. Off camera, I went ahead and assembled one of the rows, and this is the best way I like to do it, is where you start with one and you just continue down one path, and then you could then add the second. The advantage of doing it this way is that it helps jig it in place. If you're just doing 2x2, the pieces can shift on you, so it's easier just to go in a row like this, because then this will secure and anchor everything in place, and it'll make the addition of the second row go by a little bit more efficiently. After the sections of track are assembled, it's then time to revisit the teeth. As I mentioned before, there was that small little burr found on them, but now you can go ahead and address it a little bit easier. Take the unit, go up and down, some sandpaper, and there you go. The piece is now nice and flush, and smooth it away. The advantage about doing it this way is that, one, you do it all in one shot, and the second thing is because they're lined up in the jig over here, they're nice and flat, and they're not going to pivot on you, as if you try to do it freehand. Do the same thing with this set over here. And there you go. So at this point here, it's now time to join the two sections together. So to do this, I'm going to go ahead and take them off of the jig. And as you can see, the pieces are nice and flexible. And I'm going to go ahead and take two more track link pads, add them right here in the center portion of the jig. Again, make sure the orientation is correct. And again, it's always easier to do when you're not on camera. Then, with the way these things are designed, you see that little section over there? It just lines up on one, line this guy up on the other. And the big advantage about these tracks is that they are non-directional, so it's not like an M60 or a Sherman where we have chevrons, or even the early M1s for that matter. With this one, you don't have to worry about direction, which is the reason why they actually went with these tracks. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead, add a small little finite amount of glue as I mentioned before. Just like so. Drop the one in, and do the same thing with the one on the opposite side. Want to make sure there's nothing, by the way, in the channels. There was a little crud on there from just something. Went ahead and just took care of that. There's your glue. And just like with all workable track links, it's the amount of glue and the locations where the glue needs to be applied, and that's the secret really to all of them, no matter what the brand. And there you go. You now have 16 links that are assembled. As you can see, the flexibility is really good. I have here one of the sprockets, and let's see it do a timing check. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. So from here, literally rinse, wash, repeat until I have the exact same number as I do on the full span that I mentioned before. And here you can see the two track bands fully assembled, and this one here, they're ready for painting. The units, in addition to having the track bands themselves being ready for paint, you'll see that I snipped off a few blocks, and these ones are going to be head off into paint separately. Because the way these units can join, you need to actually have a joining link as opposed to a joining end connector to have the pieces made together. This is best done with the pieces strewn out like this, as opposed to when they're fully assembled, as trying to paint track bands when they're in that format is a bit problematic. For the actual paintwork, because these components here are made out of polystyrene, you don't want to utilize some of the more abrasive type spray paints around the market, which is kind of funny because generally the more expensive spray paints tend to have some harsh chemicals in them that could potentially harm the material that the units are made in, and then they'll gum up the works and you're actually not doing yourself any favors. So I would avoid the paints from Rust-Oleum or Krylon in order to spray paint these tracks, and generally I roll with a set of El Cheapo flat black spray paint. At the time of filming this video, I normally used to roll with this stuff over here. However, last time I went to stock up, I was told by my local Home Depot that they don't stock this paint anymore, which was definitely a concern because I really like the cheap spray paint for use as primer on all of my models, and for the sake of this one here for the workable tracks. So I went ahead and went to Lowe's and got this can that we have here. In the past, I have mentioned about the Lowe's brand of spray paints. However, the cans looked a bit different, and those paints were a bit more on the runnier side compared to these ones here. These ones, so far, from the limited use I've had the opportunity to working with, have been very similar to some of the more premium spray paints, which is good in one way, but on the other way, I'm still a little bit hesitant on trying it out on these tracks here. So on this model, I'm still not sure if I'm going to roll with the spray paint or if I'm just going to go ahead and airbrush them with some Tamiya acrylics. I think I'm going to go with the latter on this one just to play it safe. As I spend a lot of time building these things, I really don't want to screw it up right at the tail end. So I think for this one here, I'm going to roll with Tamiya acrylics. I'm just going to airbrush them either black or NATO black, depending on the type of weathering I'm going to be going to it. So at the time of filming this scene here, the jury's still out on that. Either way, at this point here, finally the tracks are going to head off into paint, and then I could go ahead and get these things fitted in place finally. And here we have the tracks fully painted, weathered, and are at this point ready for installation. The tracks are painted with my usual, or I should say they're weathered with my usual format. If anyone watches my other videos, you'll know what I'm referring to, where the tracks are painted where the metal areas are reflecting metal and the rubber locations are rubber. And on this parent track, you would have these two big rubber pads here on the face, and then on the reverse side, you would have some rubber sections found in these areas as well. One thing I forgot to mention before is you do have a good amount of spare parts. Here we can see what's left on the sprue over here, and keep in mind I did lose, I believe, 1 or 2 links during the process of construction. There was that one mishap from before, but as you can see, you do have an ample amount of pads. You also have a decent amount of the pin sections as well. Oop, grab this last one. The one thing that I actually came dead on the money with, however, were the teeth sections. I did lose a pair. I snipped it off and it flew off to Lost Party, and I think during construction I lost 4 total. 2 were the ones I just mentioned. The other 2 just weren't able, or were destroyed during figuring out how to assemble the tracks. But I was able to have literally just enough to do the job at hand. And what I mean by just enough, I mean just enough of the same types. Obviously, I have a ton of the solid horn sections of the track still on hand. These are just going to go to my spare parts bin. Can you intermix them? Yeah, I am pretty sure that's something that is done quite often in field, specifically when you break track and you need to replace it, and you get a box of teeth or whatever, and they're the different patterns. So I definitely see that being a thing. But if you want to be all uniform, you do have enough on hand with the number of spares, but you want to be careful because they're not nearly as many numbers of spare teeth as they are other parts on this set. So with that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead now and get this thing mounted to the model. With one of the tracks fitted in place, I got to see exactly how to secure one of these clamshell design tracks onto a model. And I think it would be a bit easier to assemble it much along the lines as you would a set of single-piece vinyl tracks compared to a workable link. And what I mean by that is when you assemble a single-piece vinyl track, you basically do not have any of the wheels on at that time. You have the track installed as a complete loop like this. You hook it on the sprocket, hook it on the front idler or the rear idler depending on the vehicle. You slip it in place, and then you just go ahead and pop the row wheels and you're good to go. With a workable track link, this is, or most of the time I like to install them like you would on a real tank, where you just link you fish the track to the appropriate location, you get to the master link, and then you secure with whatever method is used for that type of track. Be it a pin if it's like a German tank, or an end connector if it's like a Sherman or a Patton. For this clamshell design here, this complicates things a bit because you have to basically have the track on tension, and you have to line it up with the one half, and then you have to seal it off with the other 2 sections. And under tension, it's a bit tricky to do, but it's still doable. It's not like it's impossible, and I'll show you how to do it in this manner. However, if I was to do this tank again, or do another vehicle with these tracks again, I probably would do it with the single-piece vinyl method, like I just referenced before. So hopefully I can get this on camera, because it's a bit tricky to go ahead and do this on a table. Believe it or not, I was able to do this while putting the model on my lap, but we'll build it as we fly it. Let's see what happens. Okay, let me grab the sprocket over here. And the first thing I'm going to do, and this is true for all tracks, either workable or single piece vinyl, is you want to time them onto the sprocket before it slides onto the vehicle. And on a workable track like this, you want to anchor the point where it's underneath one of the road wheels or in an easily accessible location. Most of the time it's in the middle, or I like to do it on the corners, depending on the type of track. But for this one here, you actually want it under a road wheel, and that's strategic because of the way the clamshell is. You need to put pressure onto the pad in order to seat it in place, and it's better when you have a road wheel like this to lean it on. Of course, you want to be careful. You don't want to put too much pressure on the damn thing, because then you can snap off the road wheel, and now you just opened up a litany of problems. So again, you're going to have to exert caution when you're doing this task, but it's better done with that. Also, on a side note, with single piece vinyls, it's also a nice pro tip to do the same thing where you have the 2 points that are riveted together, specifically if it's a tank without side skirts or all-encompassing side skirts like this, to have the piece hidden by one of the wheels, because it's a good way to conceal the riveted, welded nature of those tracks. But that's a topic for another day. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and line it up. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and time the sprocket onto the track. And by the way, the timing is excellent on these tracks. I'm not sure if I mentioned that before, but as you can see, they time on flawlessly, which is something that I can't say about the Hobby Boss T29. If anyone doesn't know what I'm talking about, I advise watching the video on that track, and you'll see what I'm referring to. So, once the piece is timed like this, I'm now going to go ahead and fish it through. And to do that, you want to make sure the track is nice and straight. By the way, there's no glue going to be used on the sprocket or the front idler. These are just held on with friction. So, just go ahead and line these guys up. With the Abrams, you have the return roller in a way where it's underneath one track, or I should say covers the inner pad on one side and the outer pad on the other side, like this. So you want to make sure that it has the proper orientation, or else it'll throw off your alignment. Slide the track through. And at this point here, once you get to the axle for the sprocket, it just finds a little sweet spot and it just slides directly in. You don't want to put too much pressure on it. Just enough for the piece to seat. Also, as a side note, this is true for all tanks. If you're painting the model with the road wheels off, which is which is the way to do it. I'm not even going to say the other thing. It's the way to don't build your tanks and paint them with the road wheels on. That's crazy. But when you do it the correct way, with the road wheels off, you are going to have some layers of paint and varnish built up on the axles, and this can inhibit the road wheels from fully seating in place, which can lead to issues. And specifically when you're dealing with a fragile track like this is double important. So before I actually go ahead and get everything ready, I actually go and take a moment or two with an X-Acto or a little snap blade like this, just to scrape off the surfaces of the axles, removing the paint, the primer, and of course the varnish. This will open up the tolerances and make the pieces slide on better. I recommend dry fitting it before you put on the track, after you remove the paint and stuff, just to make sure that there isn't some extra hand fitting that's required, because a lot of times paint will get into the inner hole here of the sprocket or the wheels, and it'll still make the tolerances a bit too tight for comfort. And that happens, you just have to remove a little bit of material, but that's best done before you actually commit. Once you're committed, you're on it. So that's something you want to definitely be aware of. So with that little PSA out of the way, I could go ahead and get the track at its tension, just like so. And unfortunately, it is off the center wheel, so that means I'm going to have to move the track slightly. Again, this is why I love workable track links. And just a little bit more. Perfect. Alright. Just need to find that little sweet spot right there. Awesome. Okay, so from here I'm going to flip the model upside down. And I'm going to go ahead and get the inner portions of the pads. So for this is where it becomes a little tricky because of the tension. Now, there are some paint layers built up on the pins, and this can have the effect of keeping the inner piece snug where it needs to be. If not, you may have to add a small little drop of glue. Nothing egregious, just a small little dab just to tack the piece in place. Remember, this tank is not going to be played with, so having the piece fully workable in this location is not really that important, but just a small finite amount of glue makes no difference. Okay, so as you can see, it's stuck to the location. Okay, bring that close. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with the other. Of course, orientation is going to be a must. The one with the porthole is going on the extremity. Okay, oh, looks like the... Okay, so I am going to add just a little drop of glue this one just to keep it where it needs to be. So, I really cannot wait for this bottle to finish so I can get another one. What a nice... Oop. It's a little much. Let me just go ahead and wipe that off. Okay. Yeah, see, there's a little finite amount of glue that I was referring to. Hopefully it comes out on camera. Alright, let's go ahead and glue this guy in place. It's not any gluing, it's more like tacking. There you go, like tack welding. Alright, there you go. With the links all set, bringing the camera closer. Okay, I just added a small little drop of glue to those two areas. Same volume that was mentioned before of the remainder of the track assembly. Also off camera, I went ahead and also tacked on the other pad just because it was moving around a little bit. So at this point here, I'm going to grab my first pad. Make sure, again, the orientation is correct. You want to have that little third fastener into the porthole section. I'm just going to hold it just like that. And then just drop this guy in place. Once it finds a sweet spot, you can put a little bit of pressure on it. I like to cradle the wheel like this, so it has a backing to it and you're not putting any stress onto the stock torsion bar, and naturally the piece is getting squished in place. When you're building the track, that's not really a problem because, again, you have that jig, but without the jig in place, yeah, it's a slight complication. Nothing major, though. Then, all you gotta do is do the same thing to the other one. Again, make sure the orientation is lined up. And the piece will just naturally seat in place once everything is lined up appropriately. And then we are all set. And there you have it. As you can see, the track times absolutely perfect with the sprockets I mentioned before, but I like the way it articulates over the return rollers. The way it wraps around the front idler over here, it's very, very true to form. And as I mentioned before, there are several options of Abrams tracks on the market, one of which is the AFV Club one. And from what I know about the AFV Club one, it's a lot like their old school M60 and M48 track, where the center tooth is integrally molded into the pad. And although this has the effect of making the tracks much easier to assemble and faster to assemble, the one trade-off is that when those tracks wrap around the idler or the sprocket, because the tooth is attached to the pad, it'll have this little blocky effect going on with just this section of the tooth protruding out ever so slightly. Not much. It's definitely not a deal breaker by any means, and it's a hell of a lot better than anything Lincoln can possibly achieve. But that is something that I just want to mention. If you are looking for something that is more true to form to the real one, you're going to want to roll with a set like this because, again, the guide horn is independent from the pads, and because of that, they will articulate more realistically around a curved object. There are some people out there where that is a thing that they're looking for, but the side effect of this is that it makes the sets much more complicated to assemble and also more time-consuming to assemble. So there is, of course, a trade-off like there is with anything else in life. However, these tracks here, now that they're on the tank, they really do flesh it out very, very nicely. It's almost a shame because almost all of it's going to get covered up with the side skirts, but that's the situation at hand whenever you're rolling with an M1 Abrams. From here, though, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and install said side skirts as well as add the last of the detail components to this model, getting it to the finish line. It's just so weird seeing an Abrams skirtless. It's just strange, but that's a side topic. In the end, what are my final thoughts on the Ryfield Models Abrams tracks? Well, they're great. They are actually very, very nicely engineered. The costs are also very, very reasonable, and the sets have some excellent results once fully assembled. They are miles ahead and below anything out of the water in regards to the original kit supplied individual link and length. And if you're working on a vintage Dragon kit like this here that's cursed with the link and length tracks, the Ryfield ones are strongly recommended. The only thing I want to mention about the Ryfield is the selection. It is the only version that they make as at the time of filming this video is the Bigfoot pattern of track. So if you're working on an earlier M1 Abrams, the one with the chevron pattern of track, the Ryfields are not going to be for you, but there are other options out there in case you're like working on an old Eschi or something and you want to swap out the tracks. For the Ryfield ones, they are, like I stated, excellent. However, if you are watching this video and you saw the entire construction from start to finish and you made it this far in the video, which is you did, I want to say thank you, and you're saying to yourself, ain't nobody got time for that. Well then, if that's you and you're looking for a replacement track solution, but you don't want to have something that's nearly as complex as this, as time consuming as this, and you want just something that's much more easier, I would recommend the tracks from AFV Club. They will also yield for some excellent results. However, they will yield for some results that take a little less time compared to these ones here. These ones are a tad bit more thorough, but both avenues will lead to excellent results. These ones here are better, admittedly, but only because of those reasons that I mentioned. Again, it's a trade-off. The tracks look excellent. They fit on the tank absolutely perfectly. If you are working on a Dragon tank, these things are beyond recommended. However, if you're looking for something a little bit simpler, I would roll with the AFV Club ones if you're working on a time crunch and you're not really looking for the true to accurate blocked section that I mentioned before. But outside of that, these tracks here are excellent. Would I get another set? Yes, I would. I would have no qualms about doing another Abrams with these tracks, and more. I may or may not be doing that in the future, but we'll see how those cookies crumble. And that's all there is to say about the Ryfield Models M1 Abrams workable track links. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being workable 1/35 scale track link tutorial and review videos like the one that you just watched, or my usual type of content being small scale model showcase videos or larger scale project update videos that frequently get posted. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again. I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Meanwhile, this guy here, yeah, I think it's high time he gets his side skirts. All right, guys. I'll see you later. Peace out.